At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the sound of steel snapping against steel shattered the quiet suburban street. The bolt cutters clanged like gunfire, echoing across perfect lawns and beige houses. But it was not just the sound of metal. It was the sound of a life about to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. Because in that moment, an HOA president turned herself into a federal criminal without even realizing it. You see that lock she cut? It was not just keeping a vehicle safe. It was guarding classified federal property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars inside my Jeep was the kind of surveillance technology drug cartels fear and federal task forces guard with their lives. And the woman swinging those bolt cutters thought she was dealing with just another neighbor. She thought she was removing an eyesore. But what she was really doing was opening a door into a war she could never win. My name is Marcus Rodriguez, but everyone in the service calls me Tank. I was overseas when this suburban nightmare began halfway around the world, sweating through desert heat, dust grinding into my teeth, bullets cracking the air. And all I could think about was home, the house my grandmother left me after she passed Willowbrook Estates. Picture-perfect lawns, sprinkler systems hissing like clockwork, the smell of mulch laid down every Saturday morning. It was supposed to be safety. It was supposed to be the legacy of the woman who raised me after my parents died when I was 12. That house smelled of her tortillas and vanilla candles. It held the echoes of her voice. Mijo, stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. I believed her words, I lived by them, but I never imagined the bully I would one day face would be wearing pearls, driving a white Lexus, and carrying the title of HOA president. Her name was Bethany Kensington Wright, the kind of woman who measures grass with a ruler, who sends violation notices for Christmas lights, left up in January 7 years as HOA. President had made her feel like she owned every family in Willowbrook, and her husband, Carl, a slick city council member, gave her the confidence to act like she was untouchable. But Bethany's obsession with control had found a new target: the Jeep parked in my driveway. It wasn't just any Jeep. It was government issue, marked with decals that made its purpose clear. And yet, 2 weeks into my deployment, an email landed in my inbox: violation notice, unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. I was thousands of miles away, dodging cartel bullets, while an HOA Karen decided my federally owned Jeep was a community threat. I wanted to laugh, but the fine was $50 a day, racking up while I was overseas, and the words on the notice carried a venom only someone drunk on authority could write. Remove immediately or face lien proceedings. My sister Maya called me in tears. Tank. She said she threatened to put a lien on Grandma's house. Maya is a teacher, gentle, quiet, not built for battles like this. But she was standing in the kitchen where our grandmother used to hum lullabies, clutching papers from Bethany, her voice breaking with fear. She told me Bethany even hinted Carl could make her life miserable at the school if she didn't comply. Imagine the weight of that moment. Me sitting in a tent across the world trying to keep drugs off our streets while my sister sat trembling at home, fighting an enemy I couldn't touch. That's when Maya uncovered the truth she dug into. The dusty files Grandma had kept, HOA bylaws signed back in 1987. And there it was. In black and white, government vehicles were exempt, military, law enforcement, emergency services, all protected. Bethany wasn't following the rules, she was inventing them. She had built her little kingdom on fabricated threats, and nobody had dared to check until now. But knowing the truth didn't make Maya safer. It made her a target, because Bethany was not just going after me. She was going after every military family in Willowbrook. The Johnsons, the Hendersons, the Washingtons, one by one. They had been cited, fined, harassed. Marines ticketed for motorcycles. Navy wives, fined for decorations. Air Force families intimidated into silence. Bethany was waging her own private war against the very people who served this country. I lay awake at night in the desert, listening to the whir of generators and the distant pop of gunfire, with the sound of Maya's shaking voice replaying in my head. Tank, she said, she is going to tow your Jeep. She already hired a truck, and Carl is backing her up. The taste of sand and adrenaline mixed in my mouth, and my grandmother's voice whispered again, Stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. Bethany thought she was. Fighting a helpless family, she thought her power was absolute. What she didn't know was that my Jeep was loaded with surveillance gear tied to active investigations that the United States government does not take kindly to anyone tampering with. Federal property, and most importantly, she had no idea that dismantling criminal organizations was literally my job. She thought she was playing suburban politics, but she had just declared war on a federal task force, and when I came home I would not just be fighting for my Jeep or my sister. I would be fighting for my grandmother's memory and for every military family she had terrorized. And the thing about fighting bullies is this: when they push too far, they never see the counterpunch, coming until it is too late. The phone call came in the dead of night, desert wind howling through the canvas of my tent, when Maya's voice cracked through the static tank. There's a tow truck circling the block right now. He keeps slowing down, staring at your Jeep like it's prey. The sound of fear in her voice was sharper than any gunfire I'd faced overseas, and for the first time since deployment, I felt powerless. Picture this: my sister alone in Grandma's house clutching her phone blinds drawn while some hired driver stalked the street like a vulture circling federal property, and behind him was Bethany Kensington Wright, HOA tyrant queen. With a smile as sharp as broken glass, she had sent a registered letter, the kind that drips with legal intimidation, demanding immediate removal of the vehicle within 24 hours. Not 4824, a countdown designed to break my family while I was thousands of miles away. The paper carried the weight of city council signatures and copied departments. It read like law, but it was pure fiction: emergency health and safety hazard, neighborhood degradation, community decline, words chosen to terrify, words designed to look official, the kind of language that made ordinary people fold and obey, but Maya didn't fold. She called me, her voice shaking as she said tank. She threatened to lean the house. She said Carl knows people at the school board. She hinted my job could be at risk. I closed my eyes, and the heat of the desert faded, replaced by the memory of Grandma's kitchen, the creak of the floorboards, the smell of vanilla candles, and her voice. Miho bullies win when good people stay silent. But my silence wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. My sister was under siege by a woman, with a ruler and a councilman husband, and I was helpless in a world away, dodging bullets. So I made my first counter-move. I reached out to JAG military lawyers who make careers out of dismantling legal intimidation. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams heard my story, and her silence was brief before it turned into righteous fury. Rodriguez, she said, this isn't just harassment, this is a federal crime. She's threatening to steal government property while you're deployed. That's not an HOA violation, that's felony theft. Her words cut through the helplessness like steel. The Service Members Civil Relief Act wasn't just about contracts and bills. It specifically protected service members from harassment during deployment. And in this case, it protected the property tied to my orders, and here was the kicker. My Jeep wasn't even mine. It belonged to the United States government, loaded with encrypted radios, covert cameras, GPS trackers worth over $200,000. Bethany thought she was fighting a soldier's family. She had no idea she was picking a fight with federal law enforcement property. But it wasn't just the Jeep. Maya started digging deeper through Grandma's old boxes, the ones stacked in the attic where dust coated the corners like a secret burial ground. And inside those files, she found something that made her gasp. Bethany had been doing this for years. Buried meeting minutes and letters revealed that she had personally lobbied the city against military housing. She wrote phrases like, transient populations don't invest, long-term code words for keep the soldiers out. She wanted veterans gone. She wanted their families erased from Willowbrook. The paper crumbled under Maya's fingers as she snapped photos of evidence, sending them across oceans to me. Tank, she whispered. She's been targeting every military family here. This isn't about rules. It's discrimination. It's organized harassment. And Carl is backing her up with city power. That moment hit me harder than the desert sun. This wasn't suburban nitpicking anymore. It was war. Systematic, targeted war against people who served, and Bethany was escalating faster than we could breathe. Maya caught her trespassing 17 times in 3 days, high heels clicking on our driveway as she photographed the Jeep, measured distances, snapped pictures of federal decals. She was documenting equipment she had no right to even look at. My Jeep security system logged every trespass. GPS cameras, motion sensors catching her in the act, and the footage looked like espionage, Captain Chen. My task force supervisor didn't hesitate when I reported the intrusions. Rodriguez, she said. How fast do you want me to make this woman's life? Complicated. Her tone carried the weight of real authority, the kind Bethany had never faced before. But suburban dictators don't surrender. They double down. Bethany brought in private security. 2 men in a white SUV plastered with the word security, circling our street, documenting my Jeep every hour, whispering lies to the neighbors. Maya called me again, her voice cracking. Tank. They're telling people you're dangerous. They're saying military vehicles bring instability. Mrs. Patterson won't even look at me at school. They're destroying our name. Imagine that feeling, fighting cartels overseas only to hear your family being slandered back home, powerless to defend them. The rage tasted like sand grinding in my teeth. But Chen cautioned. We need them to hang themselves. She said too much force too soon, and we validate their lies. And then came the moment that froze my blood. The surveillance cameras caught Bethany at 1:43 in the morning, flashlight in hand, peering into my Jeep, trying the handle, photographing the dashboard, pointing things out to her hired guards. She wasn't just harassing anymore, she was attempting to access classified federal surveillance equipment. This wasn't suburban politics. This was a felony wrapped in pearls and a Lexus SUV, and while I sat in a bunker half a world away, my sister was left to face the fallout, teachers whispering behind her back, parents questioning if a military sibling made her unsafe, and her principal asking for meetings about community concerns. Bethany was using the school against her, weaponizing her career, turning neighbors into enemies. The sound of Maya's sobs over that static-filled line burned into me more than any firefight ever had, because this was not just about me anymore. This was about my sister's life, her career, our grandmother's legacy, and every soldier's family in Willowbrook. Bethany Kensington Wright thought she was untouchable. She thought no one could stop her, but what she didn't know was that every trespass, every lie, every forged violation was building a federal case she couldn't escape. And when the hammer came down, it would not just be justice, it would be devastation. Everyone in Willowbrook woke to the same sound that morning, the slow, deliberate crunch of tires from a white SUV creeping past my grandmother's house. Security, printed bold on the side, 2 men inside snapping photos through tinted windows. Every hour on the hour, like clockwork, the neighborhood watched, but no one spoke. Not one neighbor dared to confront the patrol because everyone knew they weren't guarding. They were hunting. Maya stood behind the curtains, phone pressed to her ear. Tank, she whispered. They're saying you're dangerous. They're telling people military families bring crime into neighborhoods. Her voice trembled the way it used to when she was a kid after nightmares, except this time the nightmare was real. These men were spreading lies, painting me as a threat, while I was 8,000 miles away serving the same country they claimed I endangered. Her words broke me because reputation is fragile, especially in suburban communities. Whispers spread faster than truth. And within days, Maya said parents were pulling their kids closer at school. Hallways grew colder. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Bethany had managed to turn the community against us without firing a single shot, and that's when I accessed the Jeep. Security system, a tool meant for cartel surveillance, but now aimed at an HOA tyrant, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The infrared camera showed Bethany herself at 1:43 a.m., crouching by my Jeep, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, photographing equipment, pointing out details to the guards. She even tried the handle, pressing her face against the glass. She was not documenting a violation, she was casing federal property. That footage changed everything. This wasn't suburban bullying anymore. It was espionage, plain and simple. Bethany was circling classified technology like a thief about to crack a safe, Captain. Chen's voice carried a deadly calm when I reported it. Rodriguez, she said we let her think she's winning, because every move she makes is digging her own grave. Federal cases are built on patience, not anger. And right now she's writing her own indictment line by line. But patience was not easy when every call from Maya carried new damage too. Her life, the principal calling her in with concerns, the PTA whispering that a teacher with a dangerous brother shouldn't be around kids. She sat in that office surrounded by stares and suspicion while Bethany poisoned her reputation, and I could do nothing but listen across oceans. The chalk dust in her classroom mixed with fear in her voice. Tank. She said they're trying to push me out. It was breaking her piece by piece the same way it had broken others, military wives cited for decorations. Marines fined for motorcycles. Families isolated until they moved away. Bethany wasn't just cruel, she was strategic. She wanted us gone. But Maya didn't break. She recorded everything when a security guard cornered her in a parking lot. Blocking. Her car asking about my operations, suggesting PTSD made me unstable. She stood tall, and her teacher instincts kicked in. Are you suggesting my brother serving overseas, protecting this country, is a threat to American families? She asked, steady voice, hiding the tremor. The guard stepped closer, invasion of space designed to intimidate. But he slipped. He admitted on recording that they were investigating surveillance equipment inside my Jeep, and in that moment he handed us evidence not of HOA rules, but of federal espionage. That recording was gold. Chen moved fast, filing complaints with licensing bureaus, federal agencies within 24 hours. The guards vanished from Willowbrook, their company buried under investigation. Bethany's hired muscle dissolved into smoke, but instead of retreating, she doubled down. Desperation sharpening her edge. She filed complaints everywhere. Police, fire code, enforcement, animal control. Each one more absurd than the last, claiming veterans were. Forming militias, claiming my Jeep was explosive hazard, alleging unauthorized assemblies, and even emotional support dogs being violent. Every call, every report added to the paper trail. And what she didn't know was that paper trail was building. A mountain of federal obstruction charges. Maya's voice cracked when she called Tank. She said she is making me out to be unstable. She's telling police I'm dangerous. She's saying military families are a risk to children, and it's working. Parents whispering. Neighbors avoiding every step she took felt like walking through poison. And I sat in the desert, helpless fury burning a hole in my chest. But that was when something extraordinary began. Neighbors who had stayed silent started to notice cracks. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who had buried 2 sons in uniform, called Maya and whispered, I saw her in the night with those bolt cutters. I saw her trespass. You're not crazy, child. They began to whisper across fences and lawns, not just about Bethany's cruelty, but about her obsession. People were scared, but they were waking up. And then came the morning that changed everything. Maya's phone buzzed, shaking her awake. Tank, she gasped. She's cutting your locks right now. Her voice was pure panic. I watched through her camera as Bethany, in a bathrobe, hair wild, eyes frantic, swung bolt cutters against the chain sparks, flying as metal surrendered each snap, echoing like a countdown to her own downfall. The tow truck driver she'd hired backed away. The second he saw the federal decals. Lady, he muttered, that's government property. I'm not touching that butt. Bethany shrieked louder, spittle flying. I am the HOA president. I have authority. Her hysteria captured. By 3 cameras became Exhibit A in a federal case. She had just committed theft of federal property live on tape. And as sirens lit up the distance racing toward Willowbrook, I realized the truth. Bethany thought she was fighting a family. She thought this was about a Jeep. But what she had really done was wage war against the United States government, and that war was about to swallow her whole. The sound I will never forget. Clang, clang, clang. The final snap of my security chain as Bethany Kensington Wright in her silk robe and slippers stood in broad daylight cutting federal locks with bolt cutters' neighbors peeking from behind curtains. Mouths open in disbelief, Maya's phone shaking in her hands as she filmed the crime that would destroy Bethany forever. I was 8,000 miles away, eyes gritty with sand listening to her panic over a shaky satellite connection. Tank she's. "Taking your Jeep," she screamed. "She has a tow truck right here, and she's screaming at the driver to load it on the flatbed." I could hear Bethany shrieking through the phone, her voice breaking with rage. "I am HOA president. I have legal authority," while the tow truck driver stammered back. "No, ma'am. This vehicle has federal markings. I'm not going to prison for you." That was the turning point. The driver peeled out, leaving tire marks on the asphalt, his truck fishtailing down the street while Bethany stood screeching in the driveway, and then she made her fatal mistake. She changed the locks on the community gate, trapping my federal Jeep inside, claiming if he wants it back, he can follow proper HOA procedure, her keys jingling in her fist, like a suburban warlord declaring independence from the United States. She had just obstructed federal justice in front of cameras and neighbors. What Bethany never realized was that the Jeep itself was no ordinary vehicle. It had a built-in security system that triggered the moment her bolt cutters hit metal GPS alerts, kill switches, cameras, all pinging federal databases across 3 states. Her petty HOA stunt had just triggered a Homeland Security alert, usually reserved for stolen government weapons. Within minutes, federal marshals were en route, and the neighborhood was watching. Mrs. Patterson, the 90-year-old who had buried 2 sons in uniform, was the first to act. She picked up her phone and called every veteran, every neighbor, every person who had been quietly bullied for years by Bethany's reign of terror. By 10 a.m., Willowbrook had transformed my grandmother's driveway into a fortress, a human shield of veterans and neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. Around my Jeep, Tom Henderson, a 72-year-old Vietnam vet, planted an American flag in the lawn and declared, "You want that boy's Jeep? You go through 30 veterans first." For the first time, Maya's voice on the phone was strong. "Tank," she said. "You should see this. The whole neighborhood is here. Mrs. Chen is serving coffee." Mr. Henderson brought flags. People are standing up together for once. But Bethany did not retreat. She escalated. She began flooding agencies with emergency calls. Police, fire animal control, each one more outrageous than the last. She told police veterans were forming militias. Told the fire department my Jeep was an explosive hazard. Told code enforcement families had formed unauthorized assemblies. Every lie, every report, another nail in her coffin. Federal marshals rolled up, lights flashing, only to find themselves locked out by Bethany's new community gate. She stood on the other side, keys in hand, chin lifted, and declared, "I do not recognize federal authority over private HOA property," her words dripping with arrogance, her face caught in high definition on Maya's cameras. She had just told the United States government it had no jurisdiction. Game over. When Marshal Jennifer Torres arrived, her eyes were cold, sharp, the kind of stare that had brought cartel bosses to their knees. "Ma'am," she said, "open this gate immediately or face obstruction charges." Bethany's reply sealed her fate. She crossed her arms and sneered. "This is my community, my rules in." That moment she went from suburban dictator to federal felon. 72 hours later, I landed back in the States, still tasting desert sand and adrenaline. The first thing that hit me when I walked into Grandma's kitchen was not the smell of tortillas or vanilla candles. It was the smell of fear that had soaked into the walls. Maya sat at the table surrounded by folders, her hands trembling. "Tank," she whispered, "I found something that changes everything." She spread papers across the table. Contracts, financial records, meeting minutes, each one worse than the last. But one document made my blood turn to ice. A contract between Carl's development company and a national corporation dated months before Grandma even died. They had already sold off Willowbrook Estates. Before we ever had a chance, they marked military families, the elderly, anyone who couldn't fight back as targets for acquisition. Maya pointed at the list, her teacher instincts fueling her fury tank. She said they were planning to force us all out from the beginning, the fines, the violations, the intimidation. It wasn't random. It was a coordinated campaign, and Grandma was one of their victims. I felt the pages crumble between my fingers the same way my faith in justice had crumbled for years, but now I saw it clearly. Bethany hadn't just been a tyrant with a ruler, she was part of an organized scheme to clear land for profit, systematic fraud, civil rights violations, embezzlement, elder abuse. It was not HOA governance. It was organized crime. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew the fight had shifted. Bethany thought she was stealing a Jeep. She thought she was bullying one family. What she had really done was wage war against the memory of my grandmother, against every soldier who ever lived in Willowbrook, and against the United States government itself. She had no idea, but her suburban empire was already collapsing around her, one federal charge at a time. The war room appeared in my grandmother's living room almost overnight. The same space where she once hummed lullabies and made tortillas, now filled with federal prosecutors, veterans, neighbors, and my sister, Maya, who had transformed from a frightened schoolteacher into a force of nature. Stacks of evidence covered the dining table, contracts, invoices, letters, all pointing to one truth. Willowbrook Estates wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a front for organized crime. Carl's development company had already pre-sold dozens of homes to national corporations before their owners had even thought about moving out military families. Elderly residents, single parents, all marked for removal through fabricated violations. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez flipped through the folders, shaking her head. "I've prosecuted cartel laundering cases with less evidence than this," she said, and her words landed like thunder because what we held in our hands wasn't just HOA nonsense. It was racketeering, fraud, conspiracy. The kind of crimes that carry decades in federal prison. Maya's voice was strong, steady, almost unrecognizable as she explained how Bethany had forged entire sections of the HOA bylaws. The originals from 1987 specifically protected government vehicles. But Bethany had doctored copies claiming the opposite, and she had relied on fear to keep anyone from noticing. Maya pointed at the papers tank. She said she fabricated the rules themselves. She counted on us being too scared. To check her words burned through me because I remembered the violation notices mailed to Grandma during her final weeks in hospice. Threats of liens, fines, property seizures against a dying woman who could not get out of bed. The hospice nurse had said her blood pressure spiked every time one arrived, and I realized in horror that my grandmother's last days had been poisoned by Bethany's harassment. "Mijo, don't let them take our home," she had whispered. I thought it was delirium, but now I knew it was a warning. Maya's hands trembled as she pushed one more folder across the table. "Tank," she said. "I think they killed her violation notices, fines, threats piling up on a dying woman until her body broke from the stress, and my rage solidified into something cold, unshakable. This wasn't about my Jeep anymore. This was about every family Bethany and Carl had destroyed, and about the grandmother who had raised me to fight bullies the right way. The allies began to gather. Tom Henderson brought his network of Vietnam vets, men who had faced jungles and bullets and were not afraid of a suburban dictator. Mrs. Patterson provided surveillance photos of Bethany and Carl's late-night meetings in the community center, the teachers' union. Joined too, offering communication skills and media connections, people who knew how to take complex truths and make communities understand them. And then came Maya's boldest move. She triggered a recall election? Most people don't realize HOA boards can be removed if just a third of residents sign petitions. Maya went door to door, speaking softly but firmly, and neighbors began opening up. The Washingtons showed her racial harassment letters, the Johnsons produced fines for motorcycles. The Kowalskis displayed citations for noise from their oxygen machine, evidence of cruelty stacked higher by the hour within 72 hours. She had signatures from 67% of Willowbrook, the smell of victory mixed with the dust still. clinging to my uniform when I returned from deployment and stood in that kitchen watching my little sister lead a movement I had fought cartels. But I had never seen courage like hers. Meanwhile, forensic accountants dissected financial records showing $184,000 siphoned from HOA funds into Carl's company for projects that never existed. Embezzlement, mail fraud, racketeering charges, each sheet of paper, another nail in their coffin. Jennifer Walsh, the accountant, explained it in calm clinical tones. But my mind burned with fury because I knew those dollars weren't numbers. They were stolen from families who trusted the HOA to care for their homes. Maya looked at me across the table, her eyes blazing. Tank. She said this isn't about revenge, it's about justice. We're not just fighting for us, we're fighting for every military family across the country. And I realized she was right. Our case was no longer local. It was a model of how communities could fight back. The neighborhood transformed into a surveillance network. Mrs. Patterson's front window became command central. Tom Henderson's garage filled with radios and equipment. Maya's house became a communication hub, and slowly the silence that Bethany had ruled with turned into open defiance. The night Bethany tried to burn documents behind our shed, Maya caught her with infrared cameras, the smell of lighter fluid drifting through the yard. Bethany hunched over a trash can, feeding flames with shaking hands like a witch in the dark. She was so desperate she was destroying evidence in our backyard while federal agents watched from unmarked cars. But Bethany didn't stop there. She escalated into personal warfare. Maya's. Car vandalized tires, slashed military scum spray painted in dripping red across her windshield, broken glass crunching under her shoes as she walked around the wreckage. She called me crying. But there was steel beneath her voice too, because she knew every act of desperation was building the case. I called Captain Chen, and within hours, Federal Protective Detail was assigned to Maya plainclothes agents, blending into morning joggers and coffee shop customers, shadows guarding her life while the same veterans who had stood by the Jeep now patrolled the neighborhood combat boots, striking pavement at 2 a.m., a rhythm that told Bethany her reign of terror was over. And then Maya uncovered the recording that changed everything. Carl's voice in a city council meeting, pressuring the police chief to ignore military families, calling them unstable, disruptive, claiming their vehicles hurt property values. Hearing his arrogance made my training snap into focus. This wasn't just corruption. It was a conspiracy civil rights violations carried out by an elected official in tandem with an HOA dictator, and the law had a word for that organized crime. Bethany and Carl thought they were untouchable, but the walls were closing faster than they knew. Every move, every bribe, every forged rule documented by people who refused to be silent anymore, and as I watched Maya hold her ground stronger than ever, I felt something I hadn't felt since deployment, the certainty that victory was coming. The night smelled of smoke and desperation when Maya's cameras caught Bethany hunched over a metal trash can behind our shed, the flames flickering across her face as she fed page after page of HOA financial records into the fire, the acrid bite of lighter fluid drifting through the yard. Bethany's pearls swinging loose around her neck, her hands trembling as if she finally felt the walls closing in. She thought no one was watching, but federal agents were already recording every frantic move. Maya whispered into her phone. "Tank, she's burning evidence in our yard," her voice tight with fear but steady with resolve, and I realized something important. Bethany wasn't just cracking under pressure, she was detonating her own life. One crime at a time. The sabotage didn't stop there. Maya woke to find her car destroyed. 4 tires slashed, red spray paint dripping across the windshield like blood spelling out military scum, broken glass crunching beneath her shoes as she circled the wreckage, her breath uneven, but her resolve unbroken. I heard her voice crack across the line, but I also heard steel. "Tank." She said, "This isn't breaking me, it's proof she's losing." I called Captain Chen, who made one call that shifted everything. Within 24 hours, Maya and other families had quiet federal protection. Not obvious suits, not black SUVs, but plain clothes, agents blending into morning jogs and grocery runs. Bethany thought she was intimidating teachers and widows, but now she was being shadowed by people who specialized in dismantling criminal networks. Every step she took was under watch. The veterans doubled down, too. Tom Henderson organized midnight patrols, combat boots striking pavement at 2 a.m. like a war drum. Echoing through Willowbrook, the sound of defiance replacing the silence Bethany once ruled with. But the deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Maya found city council recordings, Carl's smug voice echoing through her laptop, telling the police chief, "Ignore those complaints. These military families bring instability. Their vehicles ruin property values." Hearing him dismiss the sacrifices of soldiers as inconveniences made my chest go cold because I knew what it meant. Carl wasn't just protecting Bethany. He was part of the machine conspiracy, civil rights violations using political power to enable discrimination. This wasn't petty corruption anymore. It was federal. Then Bethany crossed a line that stunned even me. She tried bribery cornering. Maya outside the grocery store with an envelope thick with cash, her perfume sweet enough to choke her words, trembling as she pushed the bribe forward. "Take the 50,000, move away. Find somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle." Maya didn't. Flinch, she recorded every second, her voice steady as she said no. While federal agents listened from nearby cars, attempted bribery of a federal witness carries mandatory prison time. But Bethany wasn't done. She reached further, hiring a private investigator to try to bribe federal agents themselves, as if they could be bought with the same dirty money that kept her kingdom afloat. She underestimated one thing. Federal agents don't take bribes, they record them. Meanwhile, Carl's allies began jumping ship. City council members distancing themselves, stock prices of his development company tanking, media, whispers turning into headlines, corruption allegations hitting state news. His expensive cologne couldn't mask the stench of fear that followed him into meetings. Maya, though, paid the steepest price. Anonymous threats scrawled on notes tucked under her windshield. Voicemails with distorted voices. Accidents happen to teachers who don't mind their own business. I could hear the tremor in her voice when she played them back for me, but beneath that tremor was fire, because every threat triggered a new federal charge: witness, intimidation, obstruction of justice, terrorism enhancements. Bethany and Carl were writing indictments faster than prosecutors could print them. And then the smear campaign hit full force. Morrison and Associates, a high-end PR firm Bethany hired with embezzled funds, rolled out propaganda framing me as a dangerous, unstable veteran with PTSD, claiming my Jeep endangered the community. It spread like poison through local media, through school boards, through whispers at Maya's job, until her principal called her in demanding answers. "Tank," she whispered over the phone. "Parents are demanding I be removed. They think I'm tied to militias. They're saying military families aren't safe." Her chalk-covered hands shook as she told me her career was collapsing under lies. It was not just harassment anymore. It was an assassination of her life's work. But Bethany overplayed her hand. Morrison published a report claiming military families brought crime, domestic violence, and substance abuse to suburbs. Fake statistics designed to incite hate. The moment Maya read it, I saw her teacher instincts sharpen into pure fury. "Tank," she said, "they didn't just attack us. They attacked every military family in America," and she was right. That report turned everything. Federal prosecutors shifted gears. This was no longer about a Jeep. No longer about Willowbrook. It was civil rights, conspiracy, hate crimes, RICO charges stretching across state lines because evidence surfaced. Bethany wasn't acting alone. She had been coordinating with HOA boards in 3 states, exporting her model of harassment nationwide. But just when the propaganda threatened to crush Maya, her students saved her. One morning, the school parking lot filled with children, parents waving flags, holding signs. "We support teacher Maya," chants of "thank you." Mr. Tank's sister echoing. Across the playground, their innocence, their loyalty, cutting through the lies stronger than any media spin. I felt something then, standing in the dust of a foreign desert, listening to children defend my sister. my throat tight with gratitude because the truth was shining through, and Bethany's empire built on intimidation and lies was crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. She thought she was fighting one soldier's family. She thought she was silencing one teacher. But in reality, she had ignited a fire that was spreading across the country, and for the first time since this war began, I knew she couldn't stop what was coming. The Willowbrook Community Center had never seen anything like it, the air buzzing with tension, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with adrenaline as neighbors crammed shoulder to shoulder. Every chair-filled veterans lined the walls, federal agents. Standing like stone pillars, cameras flashing from 6 different networks, and in the middle of it all, Maya standing at the podium, her hands gripping the wood, her voice steady like steel. For years, Bethany had ruled this room with whispers, threats, fines, and fear. But tonight, she faced something she could never control. Truth. Her arrival was late, deliberate, pulling up in her white Lexus as though her entrance could erase what she had done. Protesters surrounded her, veterans holding flags, neighbors waving signs, military families, matter the chant of "lock her up," shaking the glass walls of the building. Carl shuffled behind her shoulders, slumped, face pale, a man who knew the noose was tightening. Inside, the crowd turned silent as Maya began for 5 years. She said, her voice echoing off the walls. These people used their positions to wage war against military families. They fabricated rules, they embezzled funds, they harassed our neighbors until they left their homes. Her words cut through. The silence like a blade thunder erupted as the crowd roared applause, veterans pounding fists on tables, neighbors standing in ovation. Then Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez stepped forward, placing boxes of evidence taller than some of the children sitting cross-legged in the aisle. Her voice carried the weight of federal authority. We have compiled overwhelming evidence of criminal conspiracy involving theft of federal property, civil rights violations, embezzlement, witness, intimidation, obstruction of justice, she said, and each charge landed like a hammer, shattering the illusion of Bethany's power. Tom Henderson rose, his Vietnam vet voice trembling with emotion. My son served 3 tours in Afghanistan, he declared. And these people spit on that sacrifice for profit, not anymore. His words cracked the air like a whip, and the crowd erupted again. But it wasn't until I stepped forward that the room truly fell silent. I placed my hands on the podium and felt my grandmother's presence. Mijo, stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. Her voice whispered through me. Bethany Kensington Wright, I said. Thought she was cutting locks on a soldier's jeep. What she actually did was interfere with an active federal drug operation, compromise surveillance equipment worth $347,000, and jeopardize investigations against cartels across 4 states. The gasp that swept through the room sucked the air away. Neighbors clutching mouths, veterans shaking. Heads, Bethany's face drained gray as stone. Her real crime, I continued, wasn't just theft, it was systematic war against military families believing suburban entitlement outweighed federal law, and tonight that illusion ends. The moment cracked. When Federal Marshal Jennifer Torres strode across the room, handcuffs gleaming. Bethany Kensington Wright, she announced, you are under arrest for theft of federal law enforcement property, conspiracy to violate civil rights, embezzlement of community funds, obstruction of federal justice. The click of the cuffs echoed like gunfire cameras capturing the fall of a tyrant. Carl tried fleeing through the back door, but agents were already there, his wrists shackled as his empire collapsed in front of the people he once intimidated. The crowd exploded, standing ovation, shouts of justice for our heroes, mingling with tears streaming down Maya's cheeks, neighbors hugging veterans, saluting strangers, shaking hands, the spell of fear that had gripped Willowbrook for years shattered in one night. But the real reckoning came later in court when the federal judge looked down at Bethany. Her designer clothes crumpled, her arrogance gone, and said your harassment of military families represents domestic terrorism disguised as community governance. This court will not tolerate suburban tyranny. 8 years in federal prison. No parole, restitution of $647,000. Carl, 6 years banned from public office, development empire. Dismantled $3.2 million in settlements to families they had destroyed. When the gavel fell, Willowbrook changed forever. Bethany's home, seized through asset forfeiture, was transformed into Veterans Memorial Park, the laughter of children. On swings echoing where tyranny once reigned, fresh grass growing without rulers measuring each blade. Maya, elected HOA president by unanimous vote, passed the Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights, enshrining protections into law. The neighborhood that once lived in fear now thrived in solidarity. And our family found healing too. The Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights, born from lawsuit settlements, grew into a national force. Maya left teaching to advocate full-time her methods. Taught in FBI academies, her name whispered with respect by families nationwide who had once felt powerless. She married David Chen, a Navy veteran brother of my captain. Their wedding reception held in the very community center where Bethany had once ruled. I, too, found love with Elena Martinez, the prosecutor who had stood with us. We bought the house next door to Grandma's because after everything there was nowhere else. We'd rather build our lives waking each morning in the neighborhood. We fought to protect, felt like victory served daily. And every year on Freedom Day, veterans, neighbors, children gather in the park where Bethany's house once stood. Barbecues, sizzling, flags flying, children laughing, Maya at my side, hand in mine. As we watch a community finally free Mrs. Patterson, 91, cutting the ribbon each year, whispering, "Your grandmother knew you'd do something special. She just didn't know you'd save the whole neighborhood." Bethany thought she was above the law. She thought intimidation could silence truth. But she learned the same lesson bullies always learn when good people stand together. Tyranny crumbles. 18 months later, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, the same worn table, the same creaky floorboards, but the air was different, lighter, cleaner, the smell of fresh coffee replacing the fear that once lingered in every corner in my hands. I held the sentencing report, and as I read the words, I could almost hear her voice. Miho, justice served the right way. Bethany Kensington Wright sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. No parole, restitution of $647,000. Carl, 6 years, stripped of power. His development empire gone forever. $3.2 million paid to families they had terrorized. The judge's words echoing like scripture. Your systematic harassment of military families represents domestics. Terrorism disguised as community governance. This court will not tolerate suburban tyranny. But it wasn't the punishment that changed Willowbrook. It was what rose from the ashes, her house seized by the government, demolished, and replaced with veterans. Memorial Park swings, standing where her living room once was a flagpole, planted where her front door used to loom every morning. Children laugh where fear once lived. Neighbors gather under the shade of oaks. Veterans sit on benches carved with the names of families who refused to be broken. Maya, now the elected HOA president, reshaped everything she passed, the Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights protections, written into the very fabric of community law. No veteran, no soldier, no family would ever be targeted again. Dues, transparent budgets, open books, decisions made by vote, not decree. She turned what was once a tool of oppression into a model of justice. The impact reached far beyond Willowbrook congressional hearings inspired. By our case passed new laws, the Tank Rodriguez Act requiring HOA transparency and guaranteeing protections for service families across America. My sister's meticulous documentation methods, now taught at FBI academies, prosecutors using her evidence. As the blueprint to dismantle HOA corruption in dozens of states, the Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights became Maya's calling, leaving behind her classroom to fight for families everywhere. Families who now had a number to call when fines became harassment, when intimidation became fear. She became a national advocate, her voice stronger than ever. The teacher who once trembled in Grandma's kitchen, now standing before Congress, declaring no HOA, no board, no corrupt leader is above the United States Constitution. And as for me, I stayed with the task force, but for the first time I felt the meaning of home. Elena Martinez, the prosecutor who stood with us, became my wife. We bought the house next door to Grandma's every morning. I look out and see the flag flying over Willowbrook, knowing we fought for this, knowing no one can take it away again. The scholarship fund, built from settlement money, has already sent 23 military kids to college each graduation. A reminder that sacrifice can bloom into opportunity. Each diploma proof that one family's stand can ripple into countless futures. Mrs. Patterson, 91, still cuts the ribbon at every community event. Her voice trembling but proud, your grandmother. Knew you'd do something special. She tells me she just didn't know you'd save the whole neighborhood. And every summer, we hold Freedom Day in the park. Hundreds of families gathering, veterans in uniform, children waving flags, grills smoking. With barbecue, the smell of hope replacing the stench of corruption, laughter rolling through the air as a community once divided now thrives together. Veterans telling stories, children listening, wide-eyed neighbors sharing food instead of whispers. The unity Bethany tried to destroy, now stronger than ever. But my favorite moment comes in the quiet mornings, when the sun rises over rows of houses no longer beige with fear, but alive with pride. I sip coffee on my porch, Elena beside me, Maya walking, hand in hand with David across the park, children's voices drifting on the wind, and that flag whipping proudly above us, the flag Bethany once tried to diminish by calling it an eyesore. It waves now as a promise. Bethany thought she was cutting a lock. She thought she was removing a Jeep. She thought she was above the law. What she really did was ignite a fire she could never put out. She turned one neighborhood into a movement and one family's stand into a national reckoning, and that is the lesson I carry every day. Bullies thrive on silence, but silence is a choice, and when good people rise, when neighbors stand shoulder to shoulder, when families refuse to bow, even the mightiest tyrants fall. My grandmother's words echo still. Stand up to bullies, mijo, but do it the right way. And so we did. And the right way was more powerful than any ruler, any fine, any forged bylaw, because the right way toppled corruption, restored dignity, honored sacrifice, and transformed a community. Forever now, every morning when I see Old Glory fly above Willowbrook, I know what victory tastes like. Justice served, community healed, and proof that no bully, no matter how powerful, can outlast the truth. You've heard this confession. Now, wait until you hear the next one.